Hello, my name is Ari Kotler, the host of Different on SleepyHollowRadio.com. During my show, I will introduce you to incredible people who have overcome profound challenges to become successful. In this episode, my guest is the wonderful Dr. Dave Caudel. Dr. Caudel has worked as the Associate Director of the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation at Vanderbilt University for the past 3 years and in various positions at the university beforehand. He has a PhD in physics and has experience doing high-level research involving radioactivity. Dr. Caudel was diagnosed with high-functioning autism as an adult. He knows firsthand how challenging it is to be different, so he helps people like him at the Frist Center at Vanderbilt University. Today's interview focuses on the Frist Center and the work of Dr. Caudel to arm autistic individuals with the skills to succeed in our ever-changing neurotypical majority workforce. It is such an honor to have Dr. Caudel on my show today. Dr. Caudel, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be on my show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you too. Starting today, because we're going to do this interview as a time machine today, could you briefly discuss the challenges autistic people face in the workforce?
Yeah, when I'm trying to describe the autistic brain, I always like to start off by saying, look, autistic individuals like myself, more in more ways than not, we're human beings, just like everyone else with all the complexity and nuances that brings. But in some important fundamental ways, we're wired differently. And we find ourselves as a consequence of that. Sometimes what works well for everybody else does not work well for us. Sometimes it's actually harmful for us. And so it feels to us like we live in a world that was not optimized for us. And there are a lot of challenges that autistic individuals face in the workplace, which is why over 80% of people on the autism spectrum are unemployed or underemployed, including people with college degrees. And I would say for somebody like myself, who is perfectly capable of talking, because a majority of people on the autism spectrum to one degree or another do struggle with verbal communication. For those of us who can talk, probably one of the number one difficulties that we face is miscommunication, where people misunderstand what we mean when we're talking. And in turn, we're very literal thinkers, so we use the exact definitions of words, and humans have a bad habit of saying one thing and meaning something else, or saying one thing and meaning the opposite. And we have difficulty properly interpreting that. So there's misunderstandings in both directions, and that often leads to hurt feelings or resentment, and sometimes it can cause us to be bullied or even fired or let go from a job.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Our brains are like computers, I can definitely see. One time we had this, actually a couple days ago, I was in computer science class, and we had to use regular terminology to describe how to build Legos exactly. And I used the most literal definitions of words, use the left, make sure you're viewing this from this angle. But no one else did that, but I used it in such a literal way, and because of the way I used the language by the exact terminology, no one understood me at all. Even though no one else, actually ours was actually pretty close to being understood, but everyone else's didn't either, but because of the way we use language, it can be very hard to understand, and I wanted to get that in there.
Absolutely, and that's a beautiful illustration of another difference that autistic individuals have compared to most people. We're very detail-oriented thinkers, and we're very much about the minutia and the step-by-step. In fact, when we're looking for directions, those are the kinds of directions we crave. I think that's one of the reasons why you wrote it that way, because if somebody was giving you instructions, you would want those precise step-by-step instructions so you could follow them to the letter and get the result. But for most people, that's too many details, and it gets kind of confusing for them.
Right. I need those instructions, and I wonder if you're like that too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I can walk and talk and sort of act like a normal person. I've had to do that in order to sort of survive in this world, but it's not by nature, and it's actually very complex and difficult for me to communicate like that. One of the things I love to do when I'm getting around other autistic people is to just sort of drop the mask and speak more authentically with one another. It's such a delight. In my view, Autistic people are the only people who use language properly. Everybody else uses it wrong.
Exactly. That is true. So knowing this information about neurotypicals and autistics and the relationship in the workforce, how does the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation address these issues and train students for the lives that they will live?
Yeah, so it's not a trivial problem to solve. And right from day one, we recognize there's no silver bullet that's just going to solve this problem. I could design a program that, because autism is a spectrum, a multivariable spectrum, I could design a program that could serve someone like me precisely well, where it's perfect for me every step along the way, and it helps me to get meaningful employment from a strengths-based perspective. And that program might not necessarily work for you, or even probably the majority of the autism spectrum. But we can craft 1,000 tiny little silver bullets and identify specific little gaps in the services or accommodations that we need and the training we need. In the past, the view of an autistic person in the workplace was that we had to learn how to walk and talk and think like a normal person and mimic that. And if we vary from that at all, people are going to get mad at us. That ends up being a really hard ask for us, because so much of what humans do from our perspective doesn't make sense, and it's kind of tricky to emulate something that doesn't make sense to you. And more recently, some autistic advocates have said, no, we get to be our full authentic selves. They should be doing all the work to accommodate us. I myself personally believe it's somewhere in the middle, because there are soft skills that we need to learn to be able to properly function in the workplace, that most people have this amazing ability to receive a few vague instructions and then just yada yada their way to competency. Right. And just kind of figure it out, which to me looks kind of like a superpower. We need some help, more explicit instructions in learning those soft skills. So I think the path forward to a better workplace environment for everybody concerned is that folks need to understand us a little better, so they're a little bit more patient and accommodating and accepting of us, and willing to help coach us on the skills that we need to learn to be able to behave properly in the professional environment, get along, and effectively communicate with one another.
I actually agree with that 100%, and I'm going to say, if we can't interact with other people, how are we going to get our needs across is another thing. Like, if I can't talk to this person, I'm not saying about nonverbal people, that's a whole other thing, but if I can talk to this people in a way that I want to talk to, in the way that I and get my needs across, how am I going to get my needs met? Like, how am I going to get my needs met to me? How am I going to get help from a psychiatrist? How am I going to get help from my boss? Or how am I even going to get that raise I've been looking for my whole life? And I wondered, what is at the Frist Center that they can teach me that differentiates from other collegiate autism programs?
Yeah, so the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation, we are primarily a research institution, and our guiding star is a strengths-based perspective. What sort of technologies, tools, innovations, programs do autistic and neurodivergent individuals need to find and then thrive in meaningful employment? The right kind of mind and the right sort of job, with whatever supports are needed for that individual to function and flourish. That's our guiding star. So we have a multidisciplinary approach to research. We have researchers in the schools of psychology and neuroscience, but we also have researchers in the School of Engineering, researchers in the School of Business, and we're working on a variety of those sorts of projects and stuff. So the Frist Center itself, we're not really offering anything to the public directly, but as a consequence, or one of the perks of the collaborations that we have with all these other entities, is that we're now positioned in a place where autistic individuals reach out to us all the time looking for all sorts of help related to employment, either finding employment or being successful or thriving in that employment, or getting the accommodations that they need. And we're able to direct them towards resources or offer advice that can help towards that end.
That's great. I really need support like that, I would say. But I also was wondering, what does that kind of support entail? Like, does it entail social workers? Does it entail teachers? Does it entail IEPs or stuff like that?
So yeah, sometimes accommodations and supports could involve things like that. A lot of the tools and resources we have available are programs for training and stuff. Some of it is for like helping folks like you and I learn some of the soft skills that we need to be able to better function in the workplace. A lot of it is actually geared towards employers and supervisors. They need help to work with us just as much as we need help to kind of work with them. And I will say this, we work with a number of companies who intentionally and aggressively recruit and hire autistic talent. I know some companies where they have whole teams of autistic individuals working, and some of these are pretty technically demanding, intellectually demanding jobs. And when you talk to those supervisors who are often within the neuromajority, you find out when they first got that job and found out they were going to be working with a bunch of autistic employees, they were absolutely terrified because they didn't know what that meant. They didn't know what that entailed, and they were afraid that they might do something wrong or mess it up. But you talk to them after they've been working a few weeks with the autistic individuals, after they've received some basic trainings about this is how we use language, and these are some of the soft skills that we need help with, and this is how to effectively communicate with us. When you talk to them after a few weeks, they're kind of blown away at how easy we actually are to work. They say autistic people are not complex. Once you understand that we have a very literal way of thinking and we use language in a very specific way, and that you should avoid sarcasm or innuendos and try to say exactly what you mean, you form understandable two-way dialogue or communication. And once a boss and an employee are able to effectively communicate with each other, a lot of problems kind of go away. And they say that we're some of the easiest people to work with once you get to know how to work with us. And on top of that, they say that autistic employees are some of the most hardworking, dedicated, loyal employees in their company. And that's why that's why some of our partners who have begun working with autistic employees are now aggressively recruiting more, because they want to get more.
I didn't expect that at all.
Yeah.
That's crazy, because I'm always like having trouble with my peers, so I was like, how would I be great in a workplace? But it's a completely different landscape, because school's just like social. It's the complete opposite of work, would you say? Or would you say something like that?
I would say a lot of your difficulty with your peers and stuff really comes from the fact that they're just ignorant of what it is that makes you different and why you're different, and how to effectively communicate with you. I find that most human beings, once they have a basic understanding of how we think and how we use language, and are a little bit more patient and forgiving with us, generally warm up to us pretty quickly. Once they understand what our deal is and what angle we're coming at, and they understand that, like, I'm not being blunt and direct because I'm trying to attack you or because I'm trying to be rude. It's just because that's the only way I know how to communicate. And if you were blunt and direct towards me, it wouldn't hurt my feelings. So it's hard for me to guess that being blunt and direct would hurt your feelings.
Yes, 100%. Blunt and direct would hurt some people, but for us, we want it. We crave it. And you mentioned that employers have been actively recruiting those with ASD after they've hired their first ASD job candidates. How do FRIS undergraduates compare to ordinary neuroatypical graduates?
So the FRIS Center itself is not actually a school. We don't have graduates, and in fact, the vast majority of even the autistic individuals that are hired by some of our partner companies, we may have talked to them a little bit, but we don't actually do any training with most of those folks. We might offer them some advice or point them towards some resources. But the companies that I'm talking about, some of them are recruiting in such numbers that there's no way, even if we did like directly funnel people through the FRIS Center, there's no way we'd meet those criteria. Like Ernst & Young is looking to hire like 5,000 additional autistic adults this year. That's way more than the number of people that we directly interact with. So some of the tools and resources that we've been building in collaboration with them are for like job matching capabilities and stuff. And right. We also, when we find out about something, like if you're an autistic adult and you're looking for employment, anytime we find out something that you might be interested in, we have a variety of networks and stuff where we get that information out there and we spread that out as much as possible. we're in a very fortunate position because companies looking to hire autistic folks often come to us, and autistic adults looking for employment often come to us. And
Wow.
we're more than happy to help them find each other and mesh.
So anyone can basically come to the Frisk Center, is what you're saying. And
Absolutely, absolutely.
it's basically, if you're autistic, you can get it as part of your individual education, is what I'm assuming, right?
Oh, well, I'll go one further than that. If you're autistic or neurodivergent, or you suspect you might be autistic or neurodivergent, we'll do what we can to help. Because a majority of the autistic adults do not have a formal diagnosis. There's a lot of people out there that are self-diagnosed, and there's a lot more people that may not necessarily know what their neurodivergence is, but they do know, I struggle with things that most people don't struggle with, and I have difficulty like making friends, or I have difficulty finding employment, or I have difficulty staying in employment. And it's different from the common problems that most people have. Those are really good signs that you're probably neurodivergent, and we're more than happy to try to work with you and help you find a resource that can help.
So that sounds like an amazing mentorship that you take part in. And so I also was wondering about you, because this is a show that doesn't just focus on organizations, it focuses on the people behind them, it focuses on the people pushing stuff, it focuses on the people that do stuff that change the world, like you. So I would like to learn more about your research as an assistant and for your PhD. So we're going back in the time machine, back to when you were getting your doctorate, back when you were a research assistant. Let's focus on that, and can you tell me a bit about it?
Yeah, so I should probably preface that by I didn't go to college immediately after high school. Like most folks, like I wanted to be an independent adult, but I wasn't really sure what the best route with that. I tried my hand at a variety of careers, at a variety of jobs. I've been a soldier. I've been a journalist. I've done media and public relations. I've been an editor. I've worked in car sales and truck sales. I've done corporate stints, anything from customer service to loss prevention. And it wasn't until my 30s I decided to give this college thing a try. And it was during my college experience that I discovered that my particular brain is actually well suited for science. In hindsight now, that seems so obvious to me, but at the time that was something I didn't know about myself. And so I was really attracted to science, and most especially physics. And by the time I was a junior, an undergrad junior in physics, I was already working in a lab. I was doing research full time. By the time I got my bachelor's, I had 2 co-authored publications in gamma spectrometers. These are scintillators and crystals. These are devices that are used to measure not only the presence of gamma radiation, but also what color it is, which is the energy levels of it. And that's used for a variety of applications, everything from like protecting our borders and keeping an eye out for nuclear materials to astrophysics applications. And in fact, that's what my PhD was working on, was gamma spectrometers for astrophysics applications.
That's crazy how that research is so, like, you wouldn't ever think that this would be for so many things you could use it for. And I just was wondering, I just have a random question for you because my autistic brain is like that, and I just am wondering. You know those x-ray machines at border crossings?
Right?
Are those safe to go through?
So yeah, so radiation, sometimes people think of radiation as that like any radiation is bad. And that's an overly simplistic view. For one thing, we live in a radioactive world. Your body itself is radioactive to some degree. You have some levels of potassium in your body. A tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that potassium is a radioactive isotope of potassium that's actually emitting radiation. So a good way to think about is radiation safe or not is really more to think about the level of radiation or how much radiation that you're getting. We get radiation from the ground, we get radiation from the sky, and this is the world that we and all other living things on this earth have evolved to sort of like cope with. So if you, for like x-rays in particular, like if you go like a couple times a year and get like a dental x-ray or something like that, or you occasionally drive through like an x-ray machine, rare occasional exposures like that is not going to statistically increase your chances of cancer or any sort of adverse effect. Where radiation becomes a problem is when you start getting too much of it, which is why when you go to the dentist, that person steps into another room when you're doing the x-ray. It's not that one x-ray is dangerous for you. It's that if that person was standing next to you and doing 10 of those a day, every day, eventually that could add up to cause problems.
What if I was cross-country trucking every day, though?
I'm not really sure because I'm not too familiar with the exact rules, but I do know how the government deals with radiation and safe radiation levels. If there was any chance that being a trucker full time and like constantly driving into those could add up to the point where it would potentially cause damage for the individual, I have no doubt that they would ask those people to get out of the truck. If I was to take a guess, I would say they probably don't scan the cab so much as the cargo.
Right.
If I was to take a guess.
That makes sense. I know that was a big tangent, but I just wanted to go into that because it was burning on my mind, and I just want to outline that because as this is a show for education, you just got a show of a typical autistic conversation. And that's why I want to go into that, is that we talk about the craziest things, stuff you may not understand, and I wanted to go into that. It might seem weird, but I was just curious. Like, we're very technical people, and I wanted to go into that.
I think that conversation actually, I agree with you 100%, that really kind of highlights the tangents that the autistic mind could sort of like fixate on and stuff.
Right. We're going to put this as a separate conversation on like a like extra. We're going to add this as like an extra, that conversation.
Sounds good.
So that sounds like amazing research. I totally understand why that would have so many implications but I also want to go further back into the time machine. And I want to look back at your childhood. What memories do you have of the challenges you faced when attempting to socialize with your peers?
So yeah, it's so my first memory was before I turned 2.
Oh.
And I've had people tell me that I couldn't possibly remember that, but I do vividly remember it.
Oh my God.
I talked to my mom about those memories, and she's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you remembered that." So I do remember times, just shortly before I turned 2 years of age, and I remember like living in a trailer park. And when I was a little kid, I seemed to get along great with people. I was always drawn to people who were bigger and older than me. So most of the time when I was hanging out with people, they were usually when I was little like that, they were 2 to 3 times my size. Those were the type of people I prefer to hang out with. Even when I went to kindergarten, I would much rather have a conversation with the teacher than I would my peers within the class. And that kind of held. It wasn't until I was about 6 or 7 that I started to realize that I was different from everybody else, because I would oscillate between having one friend and 0 friends.
Right.
So I would have one friend, and it was usually a weird or unusual kid in his own right, and we would hang out during our free time and do things together. And then if I lost that friendship eventually because we like moved or whatever, there would be a period of time where I didn't have any friends until I found another friend. That persisted all the way up until about the 7th grade. And by then I recognized that was most unusual, because most people had lots and lots of friends. But for me, friend has a much more literal definition. A lot of people seem to use the word friend for somebody they occasionally hang out with, or they might have a slightly positive relationship. For me, a friend is someone who accepts me for who I am, and I get to be more authentic around them. And those were rare people to find. And for me, my friendships mean everything to me. I suppose all of my friendships are what most regular people would think of as like a best friend. And in part, that's because we have difficulty socializing. We have difficulty connecting with people. And as human beings, if you don't have some people in your life that sort of like get you and recognize you and value you and treat you as a member of the group, your mental health is in the toilet. Like, that's a really rough place to be as a human being. And far too many autistic people are not getting enough of that socialization that they need to be healthy and happy.
I was thinking about the best friend and friend thing right there, because my mind is just so focused on that. Like, I'm now thinking, are my friends all supposedly best friends? I might be real lucky right now. Who knew that I actually had a ton of friends by that definition? That's actually crazy. That's crazy. I want to go towards present day, and I want to look at the circumstances that led up to your diagnosis of ASD. What were they?
So that's actually kind of a funny story. While I was an undergrad, I had a friend tell me that she thought I had Asperger's syndrome, and I got deeply offended. And I set out on a mission to prove her wrong. And I can't just tell you that you're wrong. I have to quantify and enumerate your wrongness. So I went to research it so I could come back to her with a bulleted list so she could properly understand how wrong she was. And the more I researched Asperger's syndrome, there were two startling conclusions I quickly came to. One, I had a lot of misconceptions about autism.
Oh, boy.
I had been trusting Hollywood and TV shows and stuff to tell me what autism was. And the reality was so different from what Hollywood had told me that I was actually a bit salty and offended that Hollywood had gotten it so wrong. And two, I might actually be on the spectrum. But it was confusing because I would read one autistic trait and think, oh my God, that's me. I'm absolutely on the spectrum. And I'd read the next one and go, wait, that's not me at all. I'm not on the spectrum. And it was very confusing. That's why I sought out a formal diagnosis. And now it turns out no autistic person is like every one of those traits. It's a multivariable spectrum. Now, the funny conclusion to that is after a year when I got my formal diagnosis, I went back to my friend and I said, I wanted to let you know, it turns out you were right. I went and got formally diagnosed and I do have Asperger's syndrome. And she just stared at me and she said, I was only being sarcastic.
Seriously? That is okay. That is the best story ever. That is the best story that we're going to have for a long time on the show about a diagnosis story. I'm sorry. That beats every other diagnosis story I've ever heard on this show. I mean, we only have a few episodes so far, but that beats every diagnosis story I've ever heard in my life. 100%.
There is one more thing I would like to say about the diagnosis. It ended up being one of the most important things to happen in my life.
Right.
I've always been struggling to try to understand people and understand why I struggle with things that other people don't struggle with, why people seem to be so insane and incomprehensible to me at times. And getting that diagnosis helped me not only to better understand myself and finally answer the question of why do I struggle when other people don't, but it also helped me to understand everybody else better. And I've always wanted to understand people better so I can more effectively communicate with them, so we could collaborate and work together and help one another, and I can be a part of society. And that was the pivot point when my life went from okay and eventually led into awesome. So it was the most important thing to happen to me was getting a formal diagnosis.
That must be very important to get a diagnosis for a lot of people about what's been causing you a lot of, would I say, challenges in your life, is to find out why and figure out how you can help it. But did it ever raise questions for you?
Oh my goodness, everything raises questions for me. My brain is a question machine. I unfortunately, I'm one of those people that I have to have perfect knowledge about everything, which is not possible or even feasible. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I'm always trying to figure out. And anytime that I can come to a better understanding about something, it's immensely satisfying. And I feel like the more I know about the world, the more I know about people, the more I know about myself, the better decisions I can make. It's one of the major driving points. That's why somebody like me would make a good scientist. You want scientists to be people who are insanely curious and a normal person doesn't wake up one day and say, you know what, germs. I want to spend the next 40 years of my life dedicated to learning everything there is to know about germs.
Someone else said the same thing. Actually, I do remember we had an interview, and someone else said the exact same thing you just said. And I wake up and I'm thinking about stuff at midnight, and I want to look it up. But what I meant by questions was that, what questions did the autism diagnosis raise? Did you wonder, what could I have done differently? What could I have?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of myself, I am perpetually working on trying to improve myself at all times and always trying to come out with a better version of me, a better way to overcome some of the challenges and difficulties I face, a better way to take advantage of my gifts and my strengths, a better way to interact with people and treat folks. I'm always looking at improvement. That never ends. But one of the most important things it helped me with is that when I got my diagnosis, it didn't take me long to realize that each of my three kids were also on the spectrum as well.
Oh,
And I think having a better understanding of my autism and having a better understanding of their autism, I think made me a better parent. It certainly made me more mindful and recognize some of the shortcomings that I had been practicing up to that point and improving on that. So it had a huge impact on that.
that's just really personal and really touching and moving to hear. But autism, you mentioned it with parenting, and your kids are autistic. How does your relationship to your kids change, or is it typical because you're autistic? Is it like different because you're autistic, or do you have like slightly different interactions that a typical parent would have with their kids?
I almost certainly there are some aspects of my relationship with my children that look very different than the neuromajority. There's no question of that. I'll give you a perfect illustration. This happened several times. I've had times when my daughter would like come into the room and say, hey, can we spend some time together? And I'm like, sure. And she would sit on the couch, and I would sit here on the computer, and I would work on the computer, and she'd be back on the couch working on her laptop or whatever.
Huh.
A few hours go by. We don't make eye contact. We don't say anything. And then she's like, this is nice. Thank you. And got up and left. And like that doesn't look like, when regular people get together, they have to look into each other's eyeballs a lot, and they have to like talk a lot at each other to feel like they're connecting. And for us, we're in some ways, we're kind of like dogs.
That's crazy.
You go to the other part of the house to get something, and your dog just kind of follows. And it's just being in that presence and feeling welcomed in that presence is very nourishing. It's the same for
Let's
us.
make it clear that you weren't calling autistic people dogs as an insult. Just, okay.
I consider that to be a compliment because dogs are awesome.
Okay. Moving on. So, what made you want to pivot your career towards giving back towards the autistic community through the Frisk Center? We're going further into Time Machine again.
Yeah, so ever since I found out that my weirdness had a name and that there were other people out there who have the same sort of challenges that I had, when I first found that out, my first immediate thought was like, my heart broke. No one should ever have to go through what I went through just to try to be successful in this world. The idea that other people were out there suffering as badly as I had when I was younger, like it just broke my heart. And from that day to this, I've been a passionate self-advocate. Now, it turns out, as difficult it is to imagine, I was actually one of the lucky ones. There's a lot of autistic people out there who suffered far worse than even I. But I was always an open, vocal advocate for autism, which is unusual in the autism spectrum because most people on the spectrum are terrified of other people finding out that they're on the spectrum. They want to keep it secret. They want to keep it close to the chest. They just want to be treated like normal people. I was comfortable and willing to throw myself out on the public stage. And so I think my advocacy work sort of like got some people's attention all the way up to the point when the day I got my PhD in physics, my boss came up to me and said, I'm opening up a center to help autistic adults and I want you to be the director. And I couldn't say no.
Wow.
It was a little scary to put all that work and effort into becoming a physicist and then immediately pivot into another direction once I accomplished that goal. But, I did it in part because autistic people, we are one of the most underserved segments of the population out there today. Autism is often referred to as an invisible disability. People often don't even realize what sort of challenges and struggles. And when we're in situations where we should really be receiving some compassion or some patience or help, and instead we get ignorance and anger and pushback from people who just don't understand why we're struggling. And there's not enough work being done in this area So anything that I could say or do that could try to help move that needle in the right direction, yeah, absolutely. But more importantly, physics and autism research in a lot of ways is very different from each other. But one of the things they both have in common is it's both built off the scientific method. And if you understand the mechanisms of good science, and you practice the mechanisms of good science, and you get the relevant experts in the related field to work alongside you, science is science, regardless of what field it is.
Right. We're almost at the end of our interview, so I was wondering, for my last question before we close, what should an autistic student consider when comparing college support programs at colleges they may go to?
Yeah, so it's actually, today it's never been a better time to be an autistic student considering college than today. There have been so many advances just made in just the last few years. And one of the most powerful resources out there that has grown over the last 6-8 years is the College Autism Network. And the College Autism Network is a collection of directors and program managers who serve the autistic students in their undergraduate colleges, and they have formal programs and stuff. It's now at a point where we helped the College Autism Network put together a searchable database. So you can search colleges by autism support programs, and you can break it down by how expensive it is. You can break it down by region. You can break it down in all sorts of ways. So if you're an autistic student and you recognize, hey, when I get to college, I might need a little extra help, and I'm looking for a formal program that can sort of support me, that's a resource that you can use to find those colleges. My daughter, that's one of the tools that she used to pick her college.
Right.
And she goes to a college with a formal program.
Right. So I think our listeners might be interested in that. Can you give the link to the College Autism Network website?
Yeah, I would. I'm pretty sure that we have that on our website. If you Google College Autism Network, you'll probably find it. But if you're having difficulty finding that exact resource, if you go to our website, which is vu.edu
that's a great website.
Autism and Innovation. If you go to our website, well, we've got it there on our website as well. And if you just can't find it anywhere and you're just having difficulty, go to our contact page and reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you find it.
Right. So autism information, whatever, is that split by underscores or dashes?
No, it's all one word.
All one word.
Yeah, it's vu.edu/autism and innovation.
Autism innovation, one word. Okay. Dr. Caudel, thanks so much for being on my show. We have to close now, but you were such an amazing guest and generous to take time out of your busy schedule to be here today. I know you have somewhere to be after this interview, so you're always doing stuff. It's crazy. You have so much stuff to do. So I want to thank you so much for being on a show that for someone who's not even your student or anything. So I want to thank you for that. And I wanted to mention that you are a role model for many people, moved by the fact that when your boss was there and he wanted you to be the director of the autism program, and that was just so touching and moving for me. But it was also a hard choice for you because you were going to go into physics, and you spent I don't know how much money on your college education, and now your boss wants you to be the director. That's amazing. And so information about the Frisk Center is available on Vanderbilt University's website. If you want to explore it, you can check it out. Dr. Caudel also has a YouTube channel. I believe it's Dr. Dave Caudel on the YouTube channel. Remember to follow me on Twitter with the handle @differentak, DIFFERENTAK, for updates about my show and guests, and to reach out to me. Do you have any last words for our listeners?
It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm always happy to do what I can to help.